broadcasting now.
Okay. Did you? Can you find them?
I'm looking right now.
Okay.
It's funny, it populates so fast, it's hard to.
I can look as well.
Any luck?
Not yet. It's weird. See Glenn, so let's move him. I don't see Gretchen.
I see Glenn on the list.
Yeah, Glenn's here. I just found him.
Kevin, I'll tell Gretchen to get out and come back in. That might help.
Helpful because I don't see her on the attendee list here.
Yeah, I'm telling her right now.
Thanks.
I am too.
Yeah, I was using the search feature and she's not there either.
All right, I guess that she's trying.
I think she's trying again.
Yeah.
Apparently there's a search feature on the attendee function. After 7. Okay, good to know. Something new every day.
Well, Debbie, do you want to just start and I'll manage Gretchen for you?
Yeah.
Heather.
Trying to give her one more minute.
I've got Gretchen. See, I
You
just
got it?
promoted her.
Okay, there she is. All right. Hi, Gretchen.
Hi, I'm sorry.
All right, no worries. But it's time to call the Board of Education regular meeting on November 19th to order. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thanks, Mandy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Gretchen. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Comments from the public. Just a reminder that comments are limited to 2 minutes, and that as a board, we can limit any one topic to 15 minutes total. And we don't provide any direct responses, but listen carefully and follow up if it's appropriate. Lucille, is there any public comment?
Nope. Sorry.
Okay. Consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I thought Kevin was going to add the memorandum of understanding to the consent agenda, and it's not on the one that we published. So I think we have to have a motion to add that to the consent agenda, then we can approve it.
Okay, yeah. It's on mine.
When? Because it's not on. Did you send a new agenda out?
No, we included it on the consent agenda.
Huh.
The board docs, I think.
Yeah, Glenn, it's under the board docs. I have it too.
Well, I don't. Okay, because it didn't come out because I printed my agenda and I don't see it on there. Okay.
Yeah, you might have printed a draft perhaps, but it's on there.
Oh, okay, fine. I'm sorry. All right, great.
No worries.
Yep, go ahead.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thanks, Mandy. Second?
Second.
Thanks, Ruth. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Brings us to reports and recognition. Board's chair, that's me. There's a lot to talk about tonight, so I do not have a report, but I did want to just do a couple of things. One is to thank the staff, math, especially around the area of curriculum and instruction in math. They prepared a wonderful, in-depth, comprehensive workshop that was given this morning. So I want to thank everyone for those efforts. Very helpful, very clear, very thoughtful. I know it was recorded. I know it comes with a PowerPoint presentation. So anyone interested, I encourage you to take the time to look at that. The board will be following up probably discussions at a later board meeting about some of the specifics. Also, I don't have a formal report, but just wanted to recognize what everyone's feeling, which is the increasing anxiety about schools in light of the increasing COVID numbers and data. And I just want to assure everyone that the health and safety of students and staff remain the top priority of the board, and that Dr. Smith and his staff is in constant contact with our town health director and our district medical advisor. We'll be talking about some of the specifics in the learning update meeting, our learning update portion of the agenda. And so hopefully that will, that discussion will address some of the questions or concerns that people have. Okay, Kevin, superintendent report.
Yeah, thank you. So first, I wanted to direct your attention to an article that was published today in the Wilton Bulletin by one of our students, Justin Rosenthal. I'm going to take a minute and just read a couple of excerpts. It was terrific. So this is what Justin writes today. For as much time as we spend each year around our teachers, it's surprising how little we actually appreciate them. Teachers dedicate their entire lives to helping us students grow as people, and yet all we give them in return are complaints and mean-spirited jokes. I've learned something from every single teacher of mine since preschool, whether it was part of the curriculum or not, and it would be wrong to overlook the significant influence these extraordinary individuals have had on shaping my life. My 8th grade English teacher in particular had a profound impact on me, and I will never forget her for this. So I'm just going to provide a couple of excerpts. So that's one. In referencing his 8th grade teacher, he goes on to write, "This teacher has drastically changed my life for the better, introducing me to a passion I will carry with me for the rest of my life, and I cannot thank her enough for that." He says further, "Even when teachers can have such considerable influences on us, however, I feel as though we still tend to forget that they too are human. This past year, I've had the opportunity to grow closer to a teacher I had during my freshman and sophomore years, and I always find myself astonished after having everyday conversations with her. I can't help but sometimes forget the fact that teachers are people just like me, each with their own lives and experiences, and the thought that I, the exceptionally shy and quiet student I am, could spend over half an hour bonding with a teacher over both academic and personal interests still amazes me. I never fail to leave these now bi-weekly catch-up Zoom meetings with a large, goofy grin on my face." And so this last piece. "Growing up in Wilton, I can confidently say that I am extremely privileged to be a part of a community full of so many passionate educators dedicated to preparing the next generation to both live and thrive in a world that will soon be the responsibility. Even if not all teaching styles necessarily click with me, I still appreciate the efforts that each and every teacher of mine throughout my life has made to help me grow as a person. To all educators reading this, thank you. I don't know how much weight the statement may have, but know that at the very least, I appreciate you." So how terrific was that? And so for those listening, here's one student who, what a tremendous job and what a fine writer he is. And how generous as well to take the opportunity just to recognize that and say thank you. So Justin, we thank you as well. Just 2 other brief updates. Tomorrow, Kim has arranged a meeting with a local prevention council. So this will be a group of individuals from youth serving organizations here in Wilton, as well as some of our religious institutions. We'll be meeting with Dr. Zanakis from Silver Hill, and our goal is to check in and just follow up on our suicide response, recovery, and prevention plans. And so I'll update the board after that meeting. As well, we've also booked another session with Dr. Gerber from Silver Hill. That will be for parents and families. That session is scheduled for December 1st at 7 p.m. and we'll publish that information early next week. That's all the updates I have.
Okay, thank you. Committee reports, teaching and learning. Did they meet?
Yeah, we did meet.
Yep.
I don't have the notes in front of me, Jen. I don't know if you have notes, but I can give you the update. We discussed the potential of, well, I'll talk one thing. We discussed the potential of changing the Middlebrook schedule. I don't know, Jen, do you have the notes in front of you?
I don't have the notes, but I have what the agenda was. I guess, Kevin, are you guys going to talk more about the Middlebrook changing the schedule later?
I don't have it on my list, but we certainly we can update people.
Okay. It was just, we were throwing it out there, trying to figure out a better way to spend more time teaching and less time transitioning. So they are throwing around different ideas about what possible schedule changes we could make to make that change. The ELA curriculum review, the question, it was put on the agenda just to ask questions around Teachers College and Lucy Calkins and kind of changing her thoughts and how did that affect the changes that we were making? And we discussed the universal screening for mental health, which Kim's going to talk about tonight.
Okay, thank you. Policy? Did policy meet since last meeting?
We did. The policy committee actually met this week, and one of the items I'd like the board to consider action on is a policy review this week. It's the updated prohibition against sexual discrimination, sexual harassment policy. And when we get to that point of the agenda, I'll walk people through, why we're proposing to update it and, why we're proposing to take action on that tonight to replace our existing policy.
Okay, thank you. And business operations, Glenn. Glenn, you're on mute. There you go.
No, we met this morning and primarily discussed the premise for our budget discussions, our budget preparation for this year, our goals and objectives, going back to our mission and what we hope to achieve. It was a good discussion, and we're in the middle of Kevin and the staff are beginning the process of budget development for next year. We spent some time discussing enrollment, which will come up later tonight in our discussion with Ellen, who's with us tonight. But no, it was a good meeting. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And that appropriately leads us to the financial report.
Good evening. There's not a lot of change in regards to where we think we're going to be at the end of the year. The change is going to be what we think we're going to have reimbursed from the state and what we're going to ask from the Board of Finance. If you recall, last month's final number was considerably lower than just under the $1 million it's showing right now. That difference is because we're not sure if we're going to get third quarter reimbursements from state and/or FEMA. So I don't want to show those numbers in there until we have a better idea of if we're going to get those reimbursement numbers. Hopefully by the time we go to ask the Board of Finance for the funds to cover our expenses, we'll know at that stage if they're going to, and that would obviously lower the number we're asking from the Board of Finance. The increase you're going to see is on the salary line, because that's where I showed the savings for those reimbursements to go against, because of, you remember, it's the 7 custodians. We had some cafeteria aides. We had some super campus supervisors that we have in place. So those numbers are now we're reflecting on that line item because the projected reimbursement is not there. So there's not a lot of movement elsewhere. As you know, we froze it, but we spend where we need it to make sure that from the safety, educational, everything, the needs are met as the schools put the request in. So I would open up for questions.
Can I ask, just, was there a change in guidance, or was there anything put out by FEMA or the state that's kind of leading to, the conclusion that we might not get reimbursed? Or is it just because they're taking their time? Just how,
I had a direct conversation with the state on trying to find out what we needed to do for the third quarter to make sure the reimbursements went in. They're not sure of the level of money left that would be open for reimbursement, and if they would get more from the federal government. So it's not that it's completely dead that we won't get it. It's we have to wait and see what happens up at the state level and what additional funds they get, because they're starting to pay out the second quarter right now, And then based on what all the towns and cities have requested, they'll see if there's any residual, which I'm assuming is going to be very small. And then at that point to see if they get any additional funds from the federal government for reimbursement.
And so then, because of the way they're staging things, is there any kind of planning that we should maybe do or think about in the sense of like when we submit for future reimbursement? It seems like they're paying like second quarter and then we submitted third quarter. Is that just how our budget works, or?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question. Are you asking about the timing?
Yeah, just the timing. Like, are we, do we need to think about like timing differently, or is it just, the way our budget lays out?
No, it's the timing of the reimbursement has been solely at the state level. The reason second quarter really is happening right now, and I won't go too into the weeds, but is because the state needed to wait for FEMA to give letters to the towns to say what they were covering and not covering, so we could turn around and send that to the state to be covered. Those letters only started going out in the last month for the first and second quarter. So the state couldn't wait any longer. Their last date for reimbursement, they kept extending their date for us. They kept extending their date. Their drop dead date became October 31st. That was it. So we submitted everything. We had already submitted everything, and there's no option at this point to submit the third quarter.
Okay.
And the state is very, very good with the communication back and forth. They are updating us all the time when emails and things come out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any news from FEMA? Have they changed their qualifications, or what they're going to qualify, what they're not going to qualify?
Not just yet.
Okay.
Everything we put into them to date, they did cover, because they had already told us what they weren't going to cover. So we pulled all of that back from them, so it would make our reimbursement happen quicker, and then took that and applied to the state level, and we're getting that reimbursement.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we're still on track to perhaps go to the Board of Finance. I think your recommendation was see where we are at the end of January.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks. You're sticking with that. All right. Thank you. Enrollment projections. Our report from esteemed Ellen Essman.
Here I am. All right. I need my helper to help me get this set up. So let's do that. All right, we go share here, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That. Okay, and hit share. All right, there we go. Our enrollment projections. I had Adam Amin help me this year again. He's a 2016 grad of Wilton High School and a 2020 grad of Purdue. So.
Oh, congratulations! Great.
Yes. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present the enrollment projections for 2021. I will just preface this by saying this is a pandemic enrollment projection, because it was very difficult trying to capture really the preschool. And it was also stunning to me, the number of first graders and second graders and third graders who were in fact withdrawn from the school system, either for homeschooling or to go to private school. So that difference was quite compelling to me, to make me realize that there could very well be, I'm thinking, upwards of 44 students in that K-2 area that might come in. But let me go through and show you how I derived these numbers, and we can discuss them. It builds upon itself. The model builds upon itself. So the minute anybody has a question, please interrupt me so that we can answer the question and hopefully have you understand where the numbers came from. I'm going to start with the easy piece first, and that's the enrollment projections for K-12. And this is the history. This is just simply the history of the students as they migrate from kindergarten to first grade to second grade as they roll through the school system. So what we do is we take history, and for I'm going to start in the corner in 2015 because that's the easiest. We had a kindergarten of 236 students. Well, we would expect to see 236 the next year, but in fact, we see 256, which was a net migration of 20. And as we go through the first year, 2015, we promote all the students to the next grade. And we see that along the way, we have various net migrations for each of the grades. And then we come up with a net migration of 20 just from 2015 going to 2016. But then we also have to take into consideration that we think all the students in 12th grade will graduate. And then we add all the students that coming into kindergarten to get our net migration to the next year. So that's simply how the model is built. It's done from history, and then just the net migration results as we promote students from year to year. What was surprising to me was going from 2019, if you will, to 2020, where we have, which stunned me for the first time, a decrease in kindergarten of 9, a decrease that went from first grade to second grade of 12, and then smaller decreases as we go through. But that's pretty significant. If you look at the history of kindergarten as well as first grade, we've always had positive net migrations. So this is what concerns me when I saw these numbers of a decrease and then looked at what the actual historical data was that I received from Lucille DeNovio that indicated that of the students that exited, quite a few are being homeschooled. That's 31, and then 48 moved to private schools. So those numbers throughout the school system just caused me to pause and think that perhaps we could see more students coming into the system. But of course, that's all predicated on what happens with this virus. Yes, there's a vaccination coming out, but we don't know if there's pharmaceuticals appropriate for students. We don't know, if everyone's going to be willing to take the vaccine. So it's still a big unknown. Are there any questions yet as I go through this? Okay, so let's go to the hard part here, which was the census of kindergarten and the preschool. Now, what was difficult about obtaining these numbers is that some preschools are running at full capacity and some are not. Case in point is Children's Day School is only operating at 66 capacity, but you have other schools that are at 100%. So what we did is we kind of extrapolated using the numbers we did receive from our preschool census, which is pretty extensive. And then what we do is we do averages of history. And what happens is we take the students based upon what year they were born and say, for example, when a student is only 1 year out from the preschoolers from joining kindergarten, we look and we say, well, there were 29 students who we picked up when we joined kindergarten in 2011 or 2015, excuse me. So what happens is let me just go back to the enrollment projection. And we see, yes, in fact, in 2016, we had 229 students that entered the school system. So this is all history based. And then we say, okay, 2 years out, when a student is 2 years out from joining kindergarten, what is the difference? How many students do all of a sudden come into the school system? Well, in birth year 2011, we had 168 in children in our census in 2014. Well, that is a difference of 61 students from our actual enrollment of 29. So we put that under averages of history for 2 years out. We do the same thing for 3 years out and 4 years out. Then what we do is we come up with these averages of history just based on what happened. This part is fairly straightforward. It's just the averages of history. And we come up with these averages saying, well, 1 year out, we tend to have 51 more students from preschool enter kindergarten. If it's 2 years out, it tends to be 61 students. In 3 years out, the average is 79 students. And in 4 years out, it's 102. So what I did using birth as well as the census that we had with extrapolating some numbers, we are projecting that the kindergarten is going to be 215. And but just let me preface that by saying there was a huge dip in kindergarten. So I'm thinking that perhaps some of these students, as they move from kindergarten to first grade, depending upon our circumstances, might come back into the system, which would be, roughly 21 students between K and 2. But again, it's everything is such a big unknown right now. But that's what I project is a kindergarten of 215. So as we go through here, let's go back. I did all of the projection for the kindergartens through.
Ellen, can I just stop you for one
Sure.
second? On the kindergarten enrollment, and I might have sent this question already. So I went to your 2019 report.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you had 230 projected for next year, kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out, but then this year you come along, you do it, and you have 215.
Correct.
So is that based on the fact that the preschool enrollment is deflated this year?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And
Yeah.
we're not sure if that's due to fewer kids or preschools that said, I'm not going to run it with 30 kids, I'm going to run it with 20 kids.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks.
And that's important to know. That's very important to know because we could easily have another section of kindergarten show up. I mean, that's what's so important.
Right.
So what I did, so what I did then for averages of history here, this is another important thing to look at. What happens is we take the history yet again, and we average all of the net migrations for each grade as they go through the school system. So for kindergarten, moving to first grade, we now have an average of net 9 migrating from kindergarten to first grade from 2020 to 2021. And that is because we take the first 3 numbers here, the most recent, and add those and average them out, and that came to 7, and that's primarily, deflated because of the -9 migration we have in 2019 to 2020. We then take a 4-year average, which are these numbers, divide them by 4, we came up with 9, and then the 5-year average was 11 because we had significant migrations if you go back to 2015, 2016, and 2017, and then all of a sudden it really dropped off. What I do then, and this is important, is I average out my averages so that if there are any anomalies, like case in point, you have a pandemic, that no one number is totally going to impact this particular migration for this grade. That's really important to know. So I do that for every grade moving, for example, first grade moving to second grade, and then, second grade to third grade. And I come up with these averages right here. And my net migrations is really only going to be a +10. And what happens is you see this -114. Well, that's my net migrations of +10. And remember, we assume the entire high school is graduating. So that's going to be a -339. And we're only picking up 215 kindergartners. So that's why we're showing a decrease of 114 students. And it's really because we're graduating higher numbers than what's entering our school system. All right, we just did some graphs so you could see. Are there any questions before I move along? I just want to make sure everybody understands what I'm trying to explain to everyone.
I'm just curious if we have a sense too with the, potential next year kindergarten class,
Mhm.
how many parents may have opted to delay entrance into kindergarten from
Yeah, I looked at a nice chart that Lucille Denovio did for me. And if I add these numbers up, the numbers came to 10, 14, 27 students. So that's a significant number. That could all of a sudden, if all of a sudden something happens to COVID and, everybody can go back to a normal life, great. But I mean, I personally would have concerns sending a young child to school, and that's just me. I'm, kind of a cautious person. So I could see why some of these parents do that. And we don't know what kind of pharmaceuticals there are going to be. It's a big unknown. But, having said that, I need to really expound the point that we could easily have another 21 students entering the system from K to 2. So that's important.
And
then
Ellen or
what?
either one of you guys, do we know sometimes kids don't enter kindergarten because they're a fall birthday? And I feel like many of our kids who were fall birthdays, many of those parents did decide to hold back. Do you guys know if that's actually true or not true?
Some do, but the numbers have always been low.
Sorry, Ellen, say again.
Usually like 15, or not 15, usually lower. This year, it seemed to me that it was like at 13, but normally it's something like 5. The most I've ever seen is 8. So it's not, I mean, there are some, but not as significant as this year. Did you have another follow-up?
No, never mind. I think I froze, so I kind of it's okay. I'll figure it out later.
Oh,
thank you.
Okay, you can always email me, okay? And ask me whatever questions you want. I'm available all the time. I have no life, so.
Don't say that, Ellen.
I really don't. I go from my house to my office, and then Caroluzzi's. Now that I'm 60, I get to go to the old people shop at Caroluzzi's. So I go at 7 a.m. That's my life. So then what we did is we have some graphs just showing the history of the different grades. It's really good to see what we have in terms of 15 to 2020. You can definitely see the trend is getting a bit lower. Whoops, what did I do here? Okay, a bit lower. And then from our enrollment projection, as we go from 2021 to 2028, the trend is definitely lower. But I'm just yet again cautioning everyone, the trend's lower because of this pandemic. And I think that I told Dr. Smith that I would keep an eye on this because we also had home transfers and home sales of 408 in Wilton through November 13th. That's a lot compared to prior years. I think last year, if I remember correctly, it was something like, it was like 112. It was very low. And the year before that was even lower. So 408 is a huge number. They are incorporated into my October 20th numbers, but if this trend continues through the year, it again would have a significant impact on the school system.
So a lot of these numbers are then based on what this year is happening based on the pandemic.
Correct.
Like sort of skipping this year and trying to move it on a normal situation.
Right. What I'm trying to do is do a couple of things, is show you what I believe it's going to be right now in time, this point in time with our pandemic, but also caution you that if things change, we will have, a possible migration of students into kindergarten and first grade of 21 students.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. That's why I called this my pandemic projection. It was very interesting. So we can see the trend, from 2015 through 2028 as it tends to get a bit lower. And then we did, what did we do here, Adam? Okay. Then we did the enrollment projection just to show you yet another way of what the projection was in the prior years, so that you had some sense of what the history looked like. And I'm not going to belabor this because this is just my little colored charts that I wanted to put in so everyone could see them. All right. Then, of course, we have, I've explained to you on my, my notes and how my methodology is. So I don't think we need to go into that. I talked about how we do the net migration figure and how we came up with the enrollment, as well as the fact that I believe the pandemic has really wreaked havoc on the numbers. And here is our total projection by grade for, here we go, 2021 through 2028. And this also includes, if I can get this over here, how can I get this over here? Here we go. This also includes the K to 12 and then the pre-K. We added the pre-K in for the final numbers so that we could see what it looked like for our school system. So, you know, based upon this forecast, we are anticipating, including just K to 12, 3,677 students, and the total, including pre-K, would be 3,748. So it's not, it's almost flat from one year to the next year. So that's not terrible, but again, I can't caution you enough that we could conceivably have, you know, children coming in that are, you know, 21 more children into the school system. Let's see what else I have for you. Oh, my N, thank you. But I really would like to take questions if anybody has any questions. And you can always email me or call the office. There's no problem with that at all.
Ellen, I have a question. Can we go back to the chart you just had up before? Because I'm interested to see the change, the movement from 8 to 9, where we have all of a sudden, you know, we saw a decrease here. I don't know what year the top line is. What year is that top line?
2020.
All right, from 2020, we saw a decrease from 8 to 9, which we expect. We saw a decrease in 2020. I'm surprised that we were seeing increases like in 2022 from 8 to 9, which is traditionally a year that we see losses.
Let me take a look at that, Glenn. I'm going to go back to the other chart that I have. Let's see what we have here. And you were looking at 2022?
Well, yeah, it's just that we're not seeing declines like in 2020. We're seeing an increase from 8 to 9. Then we see, I guess, here we go, 2021, we see an increase 8 to 9. Where those years we traditionally see movement out to private schools.
Yeah, no, it really should be. I'm looking at that and I'm trying to think of why it would be off, because really, if you go back to the enrollment projection, October 2020, there is definitely a decline from 8 to 9 of 11 students, and that trend continues. I wonder if I have last year's in here. Maybe that's what happened.
All right.
Did we put last year's in maybe?
Okay, well, I see what you're doing, and I'm going to, okay, I see, yeah. Right, I got it.
Yeah.
It is, okay, I got it now. Okay, got it. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Yep.
Ellen,
You're
really
welcome.
quickly, are you sharing this report with us? Can you send it to us?
Oh, absolutely. Let me just note that right now. Otherwise, I will forget.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I think
I'm going to put it on my phone.
no, we did get it. I
Yeah,
thought we did.
Lucille sent it out, Gretchen, as an attachment later. Then
Right.
the
Oh,
agenda.
okay.
Yeah, it has been sent out. Yeah, we do have that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. But you know, if you review it and there's anything you see that you have questions on, please feel free to contact me. Absolutely.
Yeah, going to Gretchen's earlier point about, how sort of abnormal this year is and a more normal year.
Mhm.
When I looked at what you had projected in 2019,
Yes.
when the world was still somewhat sane,
Hmm.
what we would have in 2021, you had K-12, I think it was 3549.
Hmm.
And then this year, well, I'm sorry, no, you had 3677, and then this year you brought that down to 3549. So
Mhm.
that when we budget, our challenge will be that you have said we should recheck these numbers in the spring.
Absolutely.
And we need to budget, start building a budget before that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we're going to have to make a judgment call about, whether, the people who have removed themselves from the system, if none of them are going to come back, some of them are going to come back, and kind of mess with your migration projections.
Sure. Hmm.
And then we don't know what the housing market will yield.
Right.
So do you have any advice as to, do we kind of try to split the difference? Do we, sort of add more at the lower levels? Any advice or just?
I do. I would definitely add at the lower level. Absolutely.
Okay.
I really feel, and I'm hopeful that once we have the vaccination, life will return to some form of normalcy, and parents will be more comfortable sending children to school. That's my gut instinct. And I really think that we don't want to be caught with having 21 more students in our lower grades, and we're not prepared for that, and we don't have the budget for it. That would just be terrible, because that's a whole section that, if you look at some of these grades, I just personally think we would want to add those students.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Ellen, I actually have a question for Kevin. Kevin, you had mentioned maybe reaching out to our families that decided to homeschool or private. Do you guys have a time frame for maybe when you would do that?
Yeah, soon, because we're, building, we were just at business operations this morning talking about planning assumptions and then building the budget off those assumptions. And the consensus in that group was to take a rosier outlook, as Ellen was just describing, kind of pandemic recovery, vaccine, et cetera. So we really need to know as much as we can in terms of who might be considering coming back. So Lucille and I'll be working on that next week.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I think it's important to note that, I don't know if you saw the press conference earlier today with the CDC, but the head of the CDC said schools are the safest place that kids could be.
Mm-hmm.
I think parents and our teachers have really maybe gone a little too far, whatever way, relative to the safety in our schools. And he very clearly stated that, the spread in schools is almost non-existent. The spread comes from activities outside of school, family contact, other experiences outside of school, that our schools are the safest place that our kids could possibly be right now. And that was just from a news conference today from the head of the CDC. But there's absolutely no little, if any, risk of our students, transmitting internally in a school environment. If I had a kid, he'd be in school. I'd want him there, because we've done a great job mitigating and trying to control our environment. And schools are absolutely positively safe places. There's almost negligible transmission student to teacher. And this is from the CDC and from all of their data that they've gathered.
And the one thing, and again, I'm sure there's a lot of parents who are more concerned with safety. Everyone I knew who moved their children moved them because they wanted their kids to be in school full time.
Yeah.
So that's the other. So it's not just the safety. I think keeping our schools open is so important, is so paramount.
Oh, absolutely. I agree, Mandy.
Everyone I know who went to private school did it so that their kids would be in school more. So I think there's two sides of the coin: the people who are worried about their kids being in school, and also the people who really understand the benefit of live learning.
Yeah. So to the extent that we can extend that and increase that and improve that every day that goes forward, you know, we're much better off. The kids are fine in school, and they're compliant. They're doing the things that they should be doing while they're in school. So anyway, it's just, yeah, and that's from the CDC today, the legislators conference this afternoon.
Okay, are there further questions for Ellen specifically about the enrollment projections? Okay, Ellen, I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for doing this, well, doing it annually for us, you know, the way you do it so clearly, putting it together, and then of course taking on the added challenges of this year. So we may circle back to you and ask you further questions as we get into more budget building and trying to discern kindergarten and all that sort of thing. And you've heard the questions. All right, but anyway, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Ellen.
You're welcome. Bye now.
Take care. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
All right, the next item is learning model review, and we've already started some of the discussion about that. So Kevin, I'm not sure how you want to organize it tonight.
Great. So what I'm going to do is just update you kind of where we are, you know, what the numbers are, what the learning model recommendations are, and then just, you know, kind of expound on some thinking because the environment is growing more challenging. As you know, the last several meetings we've had, I've been updating on average daily new case rates. And with each subsequent meeting over the last month, the information I share gets worse. So tonight we'll continue that trend, unfortunately. The case numbers locally, regionally, across the state and nation continue to climb at a dizzying pace. So as of this afternoon, first on the website that we track that was shared with us by Dr. Chrissy Mackin is covidactnow.org. The average daily new case rate reported for Fairfield County on that website as of just a couple hours ago is 55.1. The infection rate is 1.21 and the positive test rate is 9.6 on that website. And that information is, as we've discussed in the past, we see it as more current and a leading indicator and typically kind of foreshadows what the Department of Public Health here in the state produces. So the Connecticut State Department of Public Health also updated their numbers this afternoon, and they're reporting the average daily new case rate for Fairfield County at 49.3 with a percent test positivity rate of 5.9. More locally, the DPH reported for Wilton specifically, an average new daily case rate of 31.8. And so those numbers, you know, have all just climbed dramatically. So what does that mean in terms of our schools and how is that impacting us? A couple of weeks ago, we took the step of providing information on our website that reports the numbers of staff and students who are, you know, currently self-isolating, as well as the numbers of staff and students who are quarantining as a result of close contact. So we had been updating the chart and publishing it weekly, but things have changed so fast. We just struggled a little bit to keep up with it. So as of yesterday, was the last time we published it, in terms of the staff who are confirmed COVID positive who are currently isolating, we have 2 at Cider Mill and 1 at Miller Driscoll. In terms of the number of students who are confirmed COVID positive who are currently isolating, at the high school, we have 4. At Middlebrook, we currently have 4. Cider Mill also 4. 3 at Miller Driscoll, 1 in Genesis. In terms of the number of staff who are currently on quarantine due to close contact, we have 2 at the high school, 5 at Middlebrook, 18 at Cider Mill, 20 at Miller Driscoll, 4 at Genesis, 3 who are district-wide for a total of 52. And then the number of students who are currently on quarantine due to close contact. At the high school, we currently have 43. Middlebrook, we have 30. Cider Mill, we have 71. Miller Driscoll, 51. And Genesis, an additional 11 for a total of 206. So we've nearly doubled the number of folks in quarantine in about a week. So this week, with the input of our health director, our medical advisor, and the leadership team at Cider Mill, we did make the decision to shift Cider Mill to temporary remote learning. With the rise in case numbers and the impact of so many needing to quarantine, we were incredibly hard pressed to effectively staff that building for in-person learning. So in addition to our own locally imposed quarantines, we also have staff who live in other communities, and they're having to respond to changes in school models in those places where they live. And so, for some, because of, what's happening in those communities, staff members have had to quarantine. And then, for others, with the change in school models in those communities, we also have staff who need to be at home because of childcare. So those factors also further tax our capacity to staff our schools. And I'm sure you've been keeping up with the headlines from papers around the region. That's a pattern that's playing out all across the state. And we're seeing an increasing number of districts and schools having to opt for temporary remote learning because of the staffing shortages and as a result of the impact of COVID case activity. So for here locally for Wilton, the recommendation for our other 3 schools right now is to keep them in their current models. So for Millard Driscoll, that's would remain 4 days in person. For Middlebrook and Wilton High School, that's to remain in the hybrid. As I've said already, with the increase in number of cases and the accompanying quarantine numbers, we are watching our staffing levels in these 3 schools. With Cider Mill being on full remote, we had been able to shift some substitutes to cover in those other schools. But it's important for everyone to understand that it absolutely is a challenge to keep our schools operating in person. So far, though, thanks to the good work of our administrators and their support staff in the offices, we've been able to keep our schools open. I guess the other point I would just make is that, as I've said, and as you well know, the situation's absolutely dynamic. And so, we monitor it hour by hour because it can change hour by hour. And so, conditions, as we're kind of presenting this information tonight, we could be presented with a different set of factors in the morning, which would require us to shift. And so I would just make the recommendation that, everybody, families, staff alike, be prepared to shift to remote learning if necessary. Just some other notes. Earlier this week, the CIAC announced that it's postponing winter sports until January 19th, 2021. Today, the governor announced the same, that he's also pausing all club and team sports until that same date, all those that function below the collegiate level. Just a few other points. We have received a number of questions inquiring whether we would consider transitioning to remote learning as a preemptive step coming into the holidays. We have looked at this. The very strong consensus opinion from the governor's office, the State Department of Education, and the State Department of Health is to avoid date-based closures. As we monitor our own numbers and track transmission, as Glenn was noting just a minute ago, we're still finding that, the transmission patterns for us are taking place outside of school. And so, more recently, what we've seen is there transmissions occurring in households. So it's, family transmission, as well as transmission through youth sporting events. We really haven't seen widespread evidence of in-school transmission. And so, that's a very strong indicator for us that, as Glenn was saying, the mitigation strategies we have in place are working and effective and, preventing the virus from spreading within our schools. So kind of in light of that question and the inquiry we've gotten, I would not be, and I will not be recommending that we preemptively transition to remote learning for the schools that are currently having, either hybrid or in-person learning at Millard Driscoll. I think it's really important that we try to keep our students in school, and we do so as long as we can do that safely. And so we continue the models that we're currently employing. I think it's important to say, Debbie, as you had started the conversation tonight, these are really not easy decisions to make. And in coming to them, we do have to take into account a wide variety of perspectives and considerations. On the one hand, as you noted, with each new case, the fear and the anxiety among many members of our staff increases. Even with the strong mitigation strategies in place, people really worry about contracting the virus, and that's something that we have to take seriously. Their fear is reasonable, and so it's really important that we continue to pay close attention to our mitigation strategies, ensure that they're being implemented with fidelity. On the other hand, we also have to look at the evidence of the spread as we understand it, and weigh out alongside that the benefits of in-person learning. So, from my perspective, in addition to the strong instructional benefits, students also reap very strong benefits from the social connections that occur within school and in-person learning, even as limited as they are in this environment. I will tell you, I'm very worried about social isolation and how that may increase if and when we have to transition back to full remote learning. Kim and I were speaking earlier today, and she and the mental health team in that school, and I know this is also occurring in our other schools, are paying close attention to our students' social and emotional well-being, and they're keeping track of those students who they're most concerned about. And so they'll be speaking to faculties about this and really ensuring that we're taking as many steps as we can to ensure that kids are connected and engaged, and in this environment that is proving very, very challenging. And so I think for that set of reasons as well, we really have to work hard, and again, as long as we can do it safely, to keep our kids in school in some of these in-person learning models. There was a question about Wednesdays, and so I did pursue this question this week also in anticipation of tonight. So the question was, should we reconsider the remote Wednesdays and try to find a way to bring students back on that day to have additional opportunities for in-person learning? As you all know, we originally set aside Wednesdays so we could perform a thorough cleaning in all of our buildings in between cohorts, as we were transitioning into hybrid. So I've spoken to, Jose Figueroa about the importance of that day, and I've checked in with him pretty routinely over the course of this fall about the extent to which he and his custodial staff need or rely on that day to conduct cleaning. So we spoke about this just yesterday, and he said again, as he had in each previous conversation, that they really rely on that day to do as much routine cleaning as they can, and they use it to do to clean and disinfect surfaces, in the hallways, lockers, all of these other areas that they don't necessarily get to every single night as part of their nightly regimen. And so he felt very strongly that it's important. We've seen evidence of that, the value of that in terms of keeping the whole building clean. So from Jose's custodial perspective, he felt strongly that that day matters. I also spoke to Barry Bogle and Chrissy Mackin about this, and both of them concurred with the notion that we keep the model as it is right now, and we don't bring students back on Wednesdays, at least for the time being. So I think this is something, my recommendation would be we keep our models as they are. We continue to watch those numbers, and if we get to a point in time where they come down and Jose can manage the cleaning, then we go back and we look and see if we can't adjust that to bring kids back in on Wednesdays.
Kevin, can I ask a quick question? When is the cleaning happening? Because I know that there's been some comments about people being there in the morning and it's not happening.
Yeah, we have a day crew and a night crew, and depending on what else is going on, both crews have responsibilities for cleaning. So I think the heavy lifting is done by the night crew on Wednesday evenings, but the day crew also has cleaning obligations.
Okay, thanks.
Right. I think just I guess the final note I would add here as we continue to evaluate where we are. I do see us approaching a tipping point, unfortunately, and I think having to transition Cider Mill to temporary remote learning is clear evidence of that tipping point. We want to have students in person, and we also need to continue to be guided by our health experts. If we're going to keep kids in school and engaging in in-person learning, we need to have all of our community members adhere to the mitigation strategies that are available. We need to have all of our community members think very carefully about the social gatherings in which they engage, and also about their travel plans. So all of our community members need to adhere to the governor's executive order And I think if we can, make a broad shared commitment to these strategies, then I think we can bend the curve a little bit here and get to a point where we can, bring more students back to school. But it absolutely is going to require a broad shared commitment among all of us. So I'll stop there and happy to take some questions.
Yeah, Kevin, today, I guess I'm not sure where it was from. There was a comment made that the cleaning is not really the issue. The cleaning is not, a major requirement. That the transmission occurs through the air, through droplets that are transmitted verbally, whatever. But the cleaning is really not necessary. That we're not doing. That it's not effective. And I don't know if you are aware of that or have seen it. And I don't know what the data is behind that. But it was very, very clear. It's pretty pronounced that this deep cleaning that people are doing is really not a benefit. And I don't know how that impacts us or what we do or how we respond to that.
Yeah.
But I just bring that up.
Yeah, I think, I'm certainly not an expert, but, what I've read around transmission, droplet transmission, aerosol transmission in the studies that have been conducted to date seem to be the primary avenues, and fomite transmission seems to be less of a concern. So, when you clean and disinfect spaces, you're going after the potential for fomite transmission. I wouldn't argue one way or the other because I'm not an expert, but the research that I had read, I think raised the question about fomite transmission and how long the virus could live on a particular surface. I think it has become increasingly clear that airborne transmission is the primary vehicle. All that being said, when we think about our mitigation strategies, we look at them as a set of layered mitigation strategies. So it's not just, cleaning is the one thing or mask wearing is the one thing. It's all of these activities taken in tandem that really create the safe environment that we've tried to produce in our schools.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. And I think it's absolutely the right way to go. However, I think if there is some reasonable understanding or acceptance of the fact that the deep cleaning strategies that everybody's doing really are not necessary or not effective, that at some point we need to take a look at that and perhaps adjust or do something different. Okay.
Yeah, I did have this conversation with Barry, and I got a note from Chris Burney as well. And both of them feel very strongly that the cleaning we're doing is a significant part of our mitigation work.
All right. Other questions, comments? I have a bunch, but I want to give other people a chance.
I just had a question about whether we would consider, or whether you had given any consideration to the idea of families kind of taking a pledge or a commitment, around COVID safety during the holiday time. And I know that there are some districts in Massachusetts that have been doing this, that just says that they will, abide by travel restrictions and rules set up by the state in terms of gatherings and limitations. And if they kind of choose not to take on that responsibility and that commitment, then they would have to, participate in remote learning before they can have a negative test to come back.
Sure. And I have, and I thank you for the article that you sent. I also put the question in front of our attorney because I want to know from a legal perspective, set aside just the practical aspects of that for a moment, but legally, what can we do? And and typically, typical lawyer fashion, the first response was, well, look, the law is the law, and we're all obligated to follow it as with respect to limitations on group sizes, as well as the governor's travel order. And it's the expectation that we're all going to comply with the law. So kind of that was part A. Part B was from our attorney that she didn't believe we could, nor was she recommending or advising that we have people sign any kind of pledge, because rightly she didn't think we could enforce it, and there really wasn't a legal basis to enforce it. I think that's a really important consideration. And then I think the more practical consideration is, how would we go about enforcing it? And that's whether it's a pledge or I got a question earlier about can we have people submit the screening forms, just verifying that they haven't traveled, that they don't have a temperature, those kinds of things. And I appreciate the thinking and the effort, but practically speaking, if we set up a system where we were gathering that information, I just don't know that we have the capacity to monitor it and follow up on it in a way that would be meaningful. All of our staff members right now are just, flat out engaged. And I think, the people who would be tasked with doing this, whether they're front office staff, the administrators, I don't know, the RHR staff, me, I just don't know how we could possibly take those steps and follow up with people in a timely or meaningful way. And then, there's kind of beyond the practicality, do we want to, fight it out with people? And I think, while I like the idea, I'm more attracted to the idea of people doing the right thing.
Other questions, comments? Kevin, can you talk a little bit? I just feel like we're sort of hanging on by a thread in terms of being able to stay open as much as we are. And I do want to emphasize that I really appreciate you contacting our town health director and our medical advisor, because if they feel that the transmission is not happening in schools, and we have heard that not only in Wilton but in other places, that's great news. But then all around us, of course, the numbers are getting worse, some of which, much of which is due to our behavior. And we talked about, some of the behaviors in terms of travel or gatherings or athletics, and we're in control of that. So if we can't go down the pledge route or the, sort of gatekeeping route, and we want to do the community support route, which I think we can achieve. Wilton has always, sort of worked together, and I would think that most people would rally around, exercising caution. And if there were activities that people really, felt committed to, that were still risky, that they would then make the decision on their own to stay remote, stay out of the school environment. But I do worry about when you see long lines for people waiting to get tests, and that the more cases that are out there, the more complicated contact tracing gets. I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit about testing? And I know that Mandy had sent news about a technology called pool surveillance testing. And I know that you had done a great sort of update to the board members, just sort of a information email. And you had talked about, the cost being, certainly prohibitive if we were to do it for the entire school population, even though it's quite less expensive than a private or a traditional PCR test. I'm just wondering, can we take a move and at least look at testing the staff on a regular basis until we start to at least see some of our numbers come down? And the reason I say that is because, again, the long lines for getting testing at this point, because as cases go up, everybody, wants to or needs to get tested. The anxiety level that, in spite of the, we're doing all we can with mitigation and the transmission rates, and we can be told, that schools are a safe zone. And I truly believe that. But I think testing the staff would provide a layer of confirmation of that fact, and perhaps help reduce the anxiety. and give us some confirming data, or if that's not there, then we need to know that.
Sure.
So I like the idea of pool testing because, you know, A, it's not as expensive, and B, if you do the matrix version, you can actually identify the individual. What I had heard, at least initially, was that the turnaround time was very fast, and that, you know, I know that our budget is not in the best shape, but I think if we look at staff only, I don't believe that it would make a, you know, a significant. I think it's the return on the investment is worth the extra cost that we would incur. So anyway, sorry, I'm at this question and I'm just going to keep pushing it.
Great. I'll give you two updates on testing. So, and I'll come to the pool testing second. The state, as some of you may be aware, has a program where they're providing to schools this Binax Now antigen testing. And the intention of these are rapid tests. They're designed for individuals who are symptomatic. And the understanding is this test could be administered to, you know, a student or a staff member in a school who is showing symptoms, and within, you know, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, you would have an indication of whether that individual is COVID positive or COVID negative. And if the individual is COVID positive, you've just saved a whole bunch of time in terms of trying to contact trace and quarantine. And so we're working on trying to set up the procedure to do that. So, you know, we're going to start with our school nurses and see if we have capacity among our nursing staff to be able to to administer them. You need, you've got to meet a series of requirements in order to do that. Our nursing staff would be able to do that. If for some reason they're not able to, working through Dr. Mackin and Children's Pediatric, we have a commitment from that medical group that they could provide this testing. So I think, you know, in the coming days, we'll be able to sort out the logistics and have that testing tool in our arsenal, which will be very helpful in terms of just, you know, being more timely and trying to respond to folks who are symptomatic.
I'm sorry, and just
Yep, go ahead.
Folks who are symptomatic, staff and students?
Correct. They're designed for school. These are intended for school people. Yep, staff and students. Yeah. The second type of testing that Debbie was just describing so well is surveillance testing. And so working through this organization based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, CIC Health, they're providing all kinds of surveillance testing to colleges, universities, private schools all across the country. As Debbie rightly noted, this idea of matrix testing, it's a type of pool testing. And so you gather a group of samples, you test them singularly, and in the case of matrix testing, you test them in two separate ways. And then if there's a positive case within that sample, you can identify the individual. So you don't need to go back out and get a second PCR test to try to track down who that person is. They're also, the other real added benefit that Debbie just described is the fact that they're, much less expensive. So right now, a PCR test costs somewhere between $50 and $60. A single sample pool test is about $12 or $13. And then if you engage in this matrix approach, it doubles that. So it's about $25 or $26. So I did reach back out to the company, and they are putting together a proposal for us. So in addition to setting up the testing, we have to work on the local logistics. So who would administer the test? We have to get the materials. How would we, transport the samples up to the lab that they use is up in Cambridge. So we'll have to sort that out. And then of course the cost. So, Ann and I spoke briefly earlier this week, and, we're going to look and see, what kind of availability, if any, do we have in funds in our medical reserve to try to cover the cost. So I would expect that, sometime, if not next week, right after Thanksgiving, I can come to the board with a more formalized proposal, and we can look at, what the actual logistics are, as well as, what the cost would be. And so, Debbie, per your recommendation, when I wrote to the staff, or excuse me, wrote to the company, I was targeting staff specifically. And so the understanding would be we would try to do this type of pooled surveillance testing, with our staff, as long as they're, willing to participate about once a week. Then just if the other question I have, and I think you and I talked about this already, I haven't gotten an answer to, but in terms of just the value of sampling, within a community, I was hoping to get some feedback from some of our state epidemiologists on that. I haven't yet. Hopefully, we'll get an answer someday. But I think in terms of what you're thinking about and getting some more data, providing some reassurance, at least to our staff, this would be, another tool we could avail ourselves of.
Kevin, is there any possibility of linking up with other districts to lower our cost?
Yeah, I have not spoken to this, spoken about this with other superintendents, but I could certainly pursue it. And so I think that where we would perhaps see benefit is probably not on the administration of each individual test, but maybe, if we bought supplies in bulk or, transportation sharing or something like that, we could probably pick up some savings if we could get some partners.
Okay.
And do you have a timeline as to when the rapid, testing capability would probably be put in place before the holidays, after the holidays?
We're working on it now, and I don't know. I don't have the specifics on, what it takes to get the logistics in place. I know the tests are available. I know we have to, just kind of confirm what our infrastructure is going to be here. I don't think that is going to take very long to do. And then we have to, if we have to do some training, I think that too doesn't take very long. So, best case, I think, somewhere, first, second week of December, perhaps.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Kevin, for doing all that research, and let's keep sort of going down that road and seeing what it will yield in terms of either the antigen testing and or the pool surveillance testing. And then, is there a way, perhaps in one of your updates or principals updates, maybe just to, if we can't do pledges and we can't do attestations or make something, quite so tangible, can we at least get out a very clear message in terms of which behaviors are the most risky? And then, just reiterating with families that if they make those choices, that the best thing to do would be remote learning.
Yeah, we can, I had a conversation with some folks from the Middlebrook PTA today, and they were also interested in some, just some cleaner information. So,
Okay, good.
One page with information, we can add that too.
Yeah. And I'd like to think that, people given the choice will do the safest thing for the school community. It's interesting the different takes that different states are adopting. When you look at New York City schools shutting down, and you listen to the Connecticut governor saying schools are essential work, and we want to stay open. So, we're navigating interesting times. But again, I like the fact that you're working so closely with our health director and our medical advisor, and that the transmission in school does not, at least all the data we have to date, does not seem to be occurring in school. Okay, I think we're ready for a mental health screening. Perhaps all of us are. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make light at all, but it's well timed, the agenda item. So thank you.
Great. All right. So Chuck and Kim, why don't you take us through this next agenda item?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Now I lost present mode. Okay, can you see it?
We've got it.
Awesome. Okay. So I want to begin tonight with just a little background information about how we got here. And first of all, my role as Safe School Climate Coordinator, really school improvement and working towards a preventative approach is really my focus. And so thinking about school improvement, social emotional learning, and positive behavioral supports really intersect to increase student successful outcomes. So several years ago, the district formed a social emotional learning committee to review our practices and begin to kind of develop a more integrated approach pre-K-12. And they're really charged with developing and integrating SEL throughout the district. And the committee created an SEL philosophy statement to guide the work. Goals and objectives were developed, and then the committee reviewed potential curriculum programs and selected ruler as really the district approach. Subcommittees were also formed to work on core instruction as well as interventions. And so a subgroup from this work brought to the table the need for universal screening around behavior, social, and emotional concerns. So currently, through the SRBI process in response to intervention, we screen students in the areas of academic concerns, for example, in math and reading, to determine gaps in knowledge and identify needs for assistance. But there's no formal process for screening for behavior, social, and emotional concerns, focusing on academic engagement of behaviors for students. So that's really where the discussion developed. So I like this slide because it really normalizes and pushes back against this stigma that just by simply screening, we're letting folks know that it's okay to not feel okay. The purpose of screening, one second, is to identify youth who may be at risk for developing behavioral, social, or emotional problems and really taking a preventative approach. It can be conducted on a school-wide basis, typically involves several levels of assessment to avoid over or under identification, and uses multi-tiered approach. Why should we be thinking about screening? We know that children with improved social, emotional, and behavioral skills do better academically, and that their academic and social emotional competencies influence each other. We also know that 3/4 of youth who receive mental health services access them in the school setting, and that youth are 6 times more likely to complete a mental health assessment in a school setting over community settings. So the goals of a program is really early identification, trying to identify those students who oftentimes fly under the radar, reduce the stigma, educate teachers and families about protective and risk factors, and develop or enhance partnerships with community-based mental health resources. So initially, we were going to be presenting a plan for screening, focusing on the transition years, grades 3, 6, and 9, and also students that are new to our district. COVID really changed our thinking around that currently because we're really concerned about all of our students and don't want to just focus right now, at least on the transition years. However, taking on the task of screening everybody in the district at one time seems a huge task that we need to kind of roll out in slower steps. So if we had to choose, and we spent time over the summer talking about where to start, and I think the consensus was starting at the high school to do an actual screener, because we know that that developmental population has been most impacted by the quarantine. And the worry is, where are our kids? What has that impact been? And how are they doing? Not to say that it's not important at other developmental ages, but the greatest impact and biggest risk we feel is there at this time. I'm going to talk a little bit about the observable checklist first, because while we don't want to just screen and forget all the other students, how do we begin to collect data on how our students are faring in the social, emotional, and behavioral realm? So as we begin to kind of roll things out, we decided that students K through 8, that we would focus on more of an observable checklist. That would be kind of our first level, and that really looks at attendance concerns, externalizing behaviors, changes in mood, social isolation, somatic symptoms, and their participation. So this would begin to gather some data, and then we could do further screening from there, or keep an eye on students that might be at risk. And we know our teachers already have an idea of some of those students, but this really gives us a specific focus on looking at all students and quantifying that. So then here we just have a flow chart of how we would kind of address kids that came up. So there's 3 areas of concern. No concern at all. A student could show elevated concerns or highly elevated concerns, and what our reach out plan would be on those 3 different tracks. And then the actual screener that we're considering using, we looked at different screening tools that were out there. What we like about the screener that we landed with is that it can be used pre-K-12, so we can roll that out in other grades as we utilize and try the system. It looks at internalizing, externalizing school and adaptive skills. There is a teacher, parent, and student report options, although we would be focusing on the student report initially. We already have it in our Pearson suite, up to 865 licenses. It only takes about 5 to 10 minutes to administer. There's an online version and then an intervention component as well. And this is an evidence-based tool. So this is the BAF3 BEST. And again, it's intended for early prevention and early identification. It classifies students in the areas of normal, elevated, or extremely elevated, and then has a global score to indicate risks for problem behaviors. And then again, a similar flow chart where students, there would either be no concern shown at this time, elevated risk or highly elevated risk. There's the follow-up in each of those areas. Further screening could be done, and we would monitor for tier 2 and 3 interventions depending on where a student fell. And then in terms of record and confidentiality, the results of the screening would not be kept in the student's educational records. They would be kept with support staff. The observable checklist, although initially when done by teachers, we would transfer the student name to their student ID, so there would be no identifying information. And then there's just some resources here. The parent letter would go out letting all parents know that we would be doing the screening with passive consent. So a parent could opt out if they didn't want their child screened, and then there would be follow-up once the screening is completed. Parents would get notification on where their child fell in the screening process. Are there any questions? Did I stop sharing? Okay.
Yeah, Kim,
yes.
What is your sense today at the high school where you probably are most present of the students' situation, their emotional situation? Are the students okay?
Oh, that's a big question. I think we continue to monitor and offer support and reach out to students. I'm concerned about the impact that COVID has had and the loss that students are experiencing. Some are more resilient than others. And I think it depends. Things are changing so quickly. I think the sports, although it is necessary, those athletes are going to have to deal with that. So I think things are changing. And so with each change and with each loss, that impacts students in different ways. So, I'm concerned, yet I think we have a pretty good plan in place for reaching out to students. And I think our teachers are on high alert as well. And, we continue to focus on making those personal connections.
Right. I think it's absolutely critical at this point in time to do that. Yeah, I'm concerned about our athletes who have lost, the seniors. This is their last year, and there's those sports, and it's an awful impact on them. I mean, it's so.
And I don't mean to just say athletics, or the play happened, but it wasn't in person. I think we're trying to continue things, but it's kids are having to shift and new challenges.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear, and I hope it continues that our teachers are in tune to what's going on and are giving whatever support they can give and helping, you know, our students deal with those issues. It's critical right now. We're in a tough time, I think.
We are, and I think you know, the need for the social emotional check-ins are more important than ever. And I think a lot of our staff are, you know, have plans in place to do those check-ins, you know, at the beginning of class. Yeah. And I think there's time to do that as well. So, you know, we continue to highlight that as really important.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Kim, do you anticipate that students and parents are open to this idea?
I do anticipate, and I've talked with other districts that have done this, and you know, it's a very small percentage that opts out. So I'm hopeful.
Okay, all right.
The
and
other,
then if you get, you know, say highly elevated concerns at any level, obviously do you bring the family in right away? And then is it something that the school would try to address, or is it a referral time?
It depends. You know, I would consider, depending on what supports are already in place. You know, with a family, it might be information that's shared with their outside, you know, supports. If there is no supports in place, we would refer out. And I've already spoken with Sarah Heath at Social Services, so she's prepared for referrals and is working on agencies, developing relationships with agencies that you know, would not have waiting lists and we'd be able to refer people to. So you know, we've done some pre-work there, so we're prepared.
Okay, yeah, because I always hear that there are not enough adolescent or child, either psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, that there's much more demand than there are available clinicians.
Yeah, that is a concern, but we are compiling a list with people that are taking referrals. You know, the challenge is a lot of it is telehealth, but you know, that's better than nothing. And then, you know, the other concern is that we may find that a large percentage of our population is elevated, and then that really impacts what we're doing tier 1 in terms of in the classroom. So I think while some schools are worried about that information, I think it's critical that we know that, so we can maybe embed even more social emotional supports in the tier 1 classroom. So.
Have you talked to any of the physicians in town? I'm just thinking that, yes, the school can do a screening, but many students, you know, get an annual physical. And I'm just wondering if any pediatricians make it part of their, you know, their exam. You know, obviously the school wouldn't be a part of that. They wouldn't know about it. But I just wonder if that's another layer. Do any of our I just wonder if our community of pediatricians would just embed it into an annual exam.
Debbie, I have to say I just went to a physical and it is embedded in every exam now. I think it's been that way for like 2 years.
I know New York is doing it. I didn't know if
Connecticut
it's mandatory in Connecticut.
There's actually like a questionnaire that you go through and answer 10 to 12 questions about your medical or your mental health of your child.
I think it's the PHQ-9, which looks, just so you're clear, this screener, the BESS, doesn't ask a question around suicide. It does look at depression, anxiety. So in terms of immediate risk, it's not imminent. It's not asking those specific questions. That doesn't mean on an interview that something might come up for kids that are in, that come up elevated, so.
I would just say, if I could just opine a little bit, there are never too many adults who could ask kids how they're feeling, ever. So if it's their pediatrician in their annual physical, or if it's a teacher or a counselor at school or a faith-based person, I think the more adults kids have who can ask them build a relationship and ask them how they're feeling and how they're doing, and let kids know that we're listening and that we're actually asking that question. I don't think we can do that enough. And in these days when our kids have so much going on and the pressures are so great, to know that their school district is taking a minute to ask them how they are, and then have follow-up plans, I think is critical work for our staff to do and for our kids to know that we're there.
Okay, good points. Any other comments or questions? All right, that's a good summary, Andrea. Thank you. And thank you, Kim, for presenting. Is this something that the board will approve? Would that be next meeting, Kevin?
Yes, correct. We'll put it on for approval for next meeting.
Okay, all right, because I think any type of this screening does need to be approved by the Board of Ed. So if any of us think of questions between now and then, please send them to, well, I guess you can send them to Kevin and you'll forward them to Kim, if that's okay.
Great.
All right, wonderful. All right, thank you.
I just have one.
Oh, sure.
Is it possible, Kim, to get like a sample of what the screening looks like, what the kind of questions are?
The observable checklist is embedded in the PowerPoint. If you guys have access to that, I can send you the questions for the best. That's not a problem. And we'll probably include those in the parent letter, so parents are really clear on what we're asking.
Great, thank you.
Okay, the next item, these are review and discuss policies. And so we're not moving, I think later on, there'll be some that we approve, but this is under review and discuss. So graduation requirements.
I actually need to table that policy. I have a little bit of work to do.
Okay, that's fine. We can table that. And what about student surveys?
So student surveys, just briefly, this required policy, and it was picked up during the policy audit that CABE conducted on our behalf some time ago. Our policy committee reviewed this just a couple weeks ago. So the purpose of this policy is to permit the district to engage in student surveys that help us understand student opinions on certain issues, as well as determine students' needs for educational services. And then in the policy and the regulation, it just lays out particular criteria. It's important to note we do engage in student surveys fairly frequently, especially during this time. So, the most recent that we invited students to participate in was the Thought Exchange Survey. But in terms of some of the policy provisions, there's a parent notification provision. There's a stipulation that references another policy, 6141.1. That's the pilot programs and research projects policy. And so if we elected to invite folks to participate in experimental research, which in sometimes periodically we'll work with neighboring universities to do those kinds of things, that type of project would be governed under a separate policy. And then I think probably most importantly, any survey that probes a range of areas around family information, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, those kinds of surveys would need to be approved by the board, and so this policy just stipulates that.
Okay. Any questions, comments? All right, again, this will come back for approval next time. That brings us to the action items, and there are several policies here that we talked about at the last meeting. The first one is policy 4152.6, Family Medical Leave Act. There was updated language. We talked a little bit about why that was happening, and board members had opportunities to ask questions in between time. So are there any final comments or questions about that policy? All right, is there a motion to approve it?
Yeah, so moved.
Thanks, Glenn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Gretchen. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that's approved. The next one, this is the new policy on, and I know there's an acronym for this, but the Families First Coronavirus Response Act Leave, policy C19-4152.6, parentheses A. Again, this is Maria's here to ask or to answer any of our final questions about that.
None.
All right, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thanks, Gretchen. A
I'll-
second?
Second.
Thanks, Glenn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, approved. And policy 6154, homework. Any final comments, concerns, thoughts, questions?
I just have a quick question. Somebody had asked me in the regulations, which is why I was asking about it last week or last meeting. Are the reading expectations included in the nightly minutes that were provided? Or is that excluded, like practicing a musical instrument?
I think they're excluded.
Okay.
Right.
So could we add that, I guess, to the regulations?
You want to verify that? I think that's accurate.
I'd like to go back and look. I don't think it was excluded.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so, but I'll go back and look at it.
Okay, I mean, either way, we can update it just to make sure that it's clear.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said something earlier.
That's okay.
Can we still follow the policy and not the reg?
Shall we hold this then until next meeting till we get that clarified?
I think that was part of the issue last week, right? We only vote on policy, not on regulations, which is what I found out.
Right, but if you want, if we want to feel comfortable, we can certainly, I don't think waiting until next meeting would hurt anything.
Yeah.
All right, so, and there seems to be a little bit of confusion about your question anyway, so why don't we hold this until next meeting?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Wait, I gotta get the next page. All right, this policy is new, number 3524.2, COVID-19 green cleaning programs. Any questions, comments? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thanks, Mandy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Ruth. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Kevin, this one is on for approval tonight. Do you want to just, you said you would take us through this one a little bit?
I do, and so if it's helpful, we can take them both together, 51, 45.44, and 4118, 113. It's the same policy. Upon approval, placing it in two sections of our policy manual. So the policy is here in front of us tonight because it reflects the changes in federal regulations around regarding sexual harassment under the Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. The final regulations took effect on August 14th, and they do have a significant impact on the manner in which we as an educational institution would investigate and address claims of sex discrimination and harassment. Title IX applies to education programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance and specifically prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, including sexual harassment. Until now, there have been no binding federal regulations related to sexual harassment under Title IX, only administrative guidance issued by the Department of Ed Office for Civil Rights. And so this regulation expands the requirements for the Title IX grievance procedures and consequently require significant policy and procedure revisions. Also, some time to train as well as implement. So just to kind of summarize, because the policy is rather lengthy, the regulation's rather lengthy, and really spells out the grievance procedure in great detail. But here are the, some of the kind of the big changes. Number one, under the revised federal regulations, the definition of sexual assault under Title IX is narrowed. It limits the obligation to investigate complaints only to conduct that occurred in the school's program or activity, not related necessarily to off-campus conduct. There's a mandatory response obligations of schools in terms of the provision that we provide supportive measures. There's a change in the standard for school liability, and then many more detailed grievance procedures that alter the way schools are supposed to process and respond to complaints. Let me see if there's any other really big point. In terms of, there was some leeway in applying standards of evidence. We're opting for the lower standard, the preponderance of evidence. And then there's also an appeal provision embedded in the policy. Maria, did I miss anything, or are those the kind of major highlights here?
No, I would just add that these policies have been written to comply with the law. There are times when the board has discretion and can really make some significant changes. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those times. The legal team that we have working with us at Shipman and Goodwin spent many hours over the summer poring over thousands of documents that came as a part of this new legislation. And there are significant changes, particularly to the grievance process, which affords equitable treatment to both the complainant and the respondent. And while, certainly the district had a good process in place before, this process is going to be very different in that it just requires that we provide written information to both the complainant and the respondent at the start of the investigation, that we make very clear to the respondent that there are several rights afforded to that person throughout the process. There are different points at which we would provide updates to both the complainant and the respondent. We would make all of the evidence available to both parties. There are opportunities for both parties to submit questions for the witnesses. There is a written report that is given to both parties at the end. And so some of those things reflect significant changes from past practice. And, there's an extensive training component that we've already begun to implement. I'm the Title IX coordinator for the district. We have Title IX coordinators within each building. We began the general training in October, and we've continued with more substantial training just this month, and we're going to be continuing that with the rest of the administrative team. So.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, this has got to be the lengthiest policy we have in our book. I think it was 14 pages or whatever it was. And I mean, it's incredible how detailed and how intricate and complicated this whole process can be. So I can't imagine there's anything we might encounter that is not covered with this policy, the way it's written. I read the whole thing. It's like, oh, are you kidding me? Okay. But it has to be. So, yeah.
Are there any difficulties in implementing this? Are we able to and prepared to, if the need arose?
Yes, I think we're in a good position.
We have the resources.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's less about the resources and more perhaps just some concerns about how this process might impact, just the investigation. Thinking about the fact that submitting and this is, I shouldn't opine on the law here, but recognizing that we're going to be providing all of the evidence to both the complainant and the respondent, and being concerned that that may have a chilling effect on the witnesses. that we interview through the process, because oftentimes when you are conducting an investigation and you're interviewing people, the people that are being interviewed want to remain anonymous. And while we can't always guarantee that with 100% certainty, we try to keep it anonymous. And we won't necessarily be able to do that through this process. So I think, this is the law. We'll certainly comply with it. I think that it's not without challenges in implementing it, but we're in a position certainly to begin implementing it. And we have a good plan for training in place. So.
Okay, and you're satisfied with the clarity, at least, of the responsibilities and who does what?
I think to the extent that it can be clear, because it's a highly complex process, it's as clear as it can be for something that's so complex.
Yeah.
Okay, and Shipman and Goodwin wrote this, or
yes, they wrote
drafted it?
Yes, after poring over thousands and thousands of pages of documentation related to the new regulations. So, it's very lengthy, but it's condensed after, their very careful review.
I think also just the way it's presented, while it's complicated, it leaves little room for there to be deviation from a process that is legally mandated.
Mm-hmm.
Right. No, exactly. If you read the policy, it's incredibly detailed and it spells out very clearly, what the obligations are, the responsibilities are.
Okay. All right. Other comments or questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So
I'm sorry. Let's do it one by one. Policy 5145.44, prohibition of sex discrimination and sexual harassment - Title IX.
So moved.
Who moved it? I'm sorry. Mandy? Ruth?
No, I will though. You can go ahead and put me down.
Okay, thanks, Mandy. Ruth, did you second it? I thought I heard a woman's voice, and I'm sorry. Ruth, did you second it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Ruth. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And the next one is policy 4118.113, prohibition of sex discrimination and sexual harassment in the workplace - Title IX. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Glenn. Second?
Second.
Thanks, Gretchen. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's also approved. All right, that brings us to just our calendar of the next meetings, unless Kevin felt that we needed an additional one at some point. We're always here for you, Kevin. Comments from the public. Lucille, are there comments?
No, there aren't.
Okay, so then we finish the agenda and it is 8, whatever it is. 8:53. So this meeting is adjourned. So thank you, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving and a safe Thanksgiving. And thanks for all your hard work.
Yeah. Thanks,
you.
all.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, everybody.
Happy
Stay there.
Thanksgiving.
Be safe. Okay. Thank you.